Hello everyone. This PowerPoint presentation will be about cultural competence. This slide presentation was created by myself, Dr. Janine Cross, and my graduate assistant, Nia Gibbs Francis. What is culture? When we're talking about cultural competence, you need to understand what we mean when we talk about culture in general. A definition that we like to use, or the concept of culture, is the shared values, norms, tradition, customs, history, and beliefs of a group of people. Culture has a multitude of aspects. You're not thinking about it from one variable or factor, but more a combination of factors when you're thinking about cultures. Some of those factors include geography, age, socioeconomic status, religion, gender, education, language, politics, sexual orientation, gender identity. But the important piece here to understand is that culture is more than just race, language, and ethnicity. Culture shapes how people experience their world, how they view the world, how they make decisions about the world or within the world, quality of life, work, and how people relate to others, all shaped by culture. Culture is dynamic. It also has a lot of intersections. It can control values and as well as thought patterns of individuals and groups. And so, what then do we mean when we talk about cultural competence? What is cultural competence? Cultural competence refers to the process by which individuals and systems respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, languages, class, race, and ethnic backgrounds. Also, religion, spiritual tradition, immigration status, and other diversity factors in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of everyone. And so some of the factors that you want to think about when you're understanding cultural competence, you're thinking about a social work and generalist practice who has ongoing learning and understanding um, of race, ethnicity, disability, class, gender, socioeconomic status, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, just to name a few. So again, when you're thinking about areas in which a generalist social worker is practicing and they're in an ongoing pursuit to improve their knowledge of race, ethnicity, disability, class, gender, religion, socioeconomic status, age, sexual orientation, and gender identity, just to name a few. This isn't a destination but an ongoing journey when we're talking about cultural competence. It's the integration and transformation of knowledge about individuals and groups into policies, practice, and attitudes with the goal of increasing the quality of services and improve outcomes for minority groups, individuals and groups. It is the procedures and activities used in acquiring culturally relevant insights into problems of minority clients and applying such insights to the development of intervention strategies that are culturally appropriate for these clients. Cardinal values of social work. The value of competence requires that social workers practice only within their areas of ability, as well as continuing to develop and enhance their professional expertise. Social workers must take responsibility for ensuring that their competence is not diminished by personal problems, substance use or abuse, or other difficulties. Similarly, they should take action to address incompetent, unethical, or impaired practice by other professionals. There are five essential elements when you're thinking about cultural competence at the organizational level. Does the organization value diversity? So in order for an organization to call itself a culturally competent, it must value diversity. That organization must also have the capacity for cultural self-assessments. In addition, that organization must be conscious of the dynamics inherent when cultures interact with one another. Um, Organization also has to have institutionalized cultural knowledge. In addition, organization must also develop programs and services that reflect an understanding of diversity between and within specific cultures. Organizational leaders should also work to ensure that the organization is not only committed to the idea of cultural competence, but actively working through professional training, education, and in practice to be culturally competent. Cultural competence is a three-pronged effort revolving around competence of the staff, the actual direct frontline workers, commitment to cultural competence by leadership, and analysis of public policy as it acknowledges and respects diversity and the equality of service delivery. Cultural matching. Cultural matching is a concept that we refer to. And it is when you are matching clients with a provider of similar race, or cultural background so that the provider has a greater understanding of the group experience. The practice does raise some concerns, however, and those concerns include that the provider would not have the opportunity to work with clients outside of their cultural background. Your staff as a whole would not be exposed to a diverse range of clients, and clients are not exposed to a diverse professional staff or professional group. And then also overload may occur. And when we think about overload, it's when match staff can become overwhelmed or overused because of their ability to provide cultural and enhance cultural understanding and services to clients. When the matched staff member are overused and overworked, they can be burned out, um, mentally burned out, emotionally burned out, and exhaustion can kick in for these staff members. The special skills and knowledge that bicultural and bilingual staff bring to the profession should be compensated rather than exploited. Also, self care must be attended to for these staff members as well. Assessing cultural competence. It's when you're reviewing organizational policies and practice to see if they indeed meet the standards of cultural competence. It's when you assess the organization's standing in communities of colors and or minority communities, evaluate the equity and resource allocation within a particular organization. Analyzing and distribution of power is also involved in cultural assessment. Examining narrative structures that inform agency practices, public relations, fundraisers, and board members. And lastly, analyzing the decision-making process and making sure that that decision-making process is also culturally competent. How then does a generalist social worker, learn to become culturally competent? One, learning about yourself through reflection activities. These can be done through process recordings and or similar to the reflective papers that you completed earlier on in this course. Um, Taking the time to learn more about different cultures. It's a journey, not a destination. And so this is engaging in professional development activities that help you learn more about different cultures. Interacting with diverse groups, attending diversity focused conferences, and lobby your department. You know, it's really working with your organization to enhance the training offered to staff members and helping them to be more culturally competent. Another area in which social workers can continue to grow is by understanding and frequently reviewing the standards for cultural competent practice, which um, we will talk about a little bit more at the end of this presentation. Remember that clients are the expert of their own culture and that social workers must respect and honor that and be willing participants and learners of clients as the experts in their own culture. So, what are some of the barriers to cultural competence? Barriers to competence include countertransference, and that's when a social worker's experience and emotional influences his or her perception of and interactions with the client. Transference is another barrier to competence, and it's when clients associate social workers with past experience in such a way interactions with social workers are affected, oftentimes negatively, but not solely. Health or mental health problems hindering social workers' ability to practice can also be barriers to cultural competence and competence in general, and personal reactions and thoughts that may impair social workers' judgment when working with a minority group or an unknown culture. Continuum of cultural competency is listed here. And again, think about your learning and becoming cultural competence as an ongoing process, and this continuum is reflective of a process. And so that continuum starts off with cultural destructiveness and it's forced assimilation, subjugation, rights and privileges, and for dominant groups only. It's the very earlier part of the continuum. As you're moving along the continuum to grow in a more cultural competent manner, you go from cultural destructiveness to cultural incapacity, which is racism, maintaining stereotypes, unfair hiring practice. Then cultural blindness, differences ignored, treat everyone the same, only meet needs of dominant group. Then there's cultural precompetence, where you're starting to explore cultural issues or starting to become more committed to exploring cultural issues. You then begin assessing the needs of organization and individuals. Cultural competence is recognizing individuals and cultural differences. You're seeking advice from diverse groups. You're hiring culturally unbiased staff. And then the other end of the continuum is cultural proficiency, is where you are implementing changes to improve services based upon cultural needs. And you're also engaging in those continual quality improvement projects to make sure that the organization or the social worker is constantly improving um, the work that they're doing with minority groups in order to give them the best outcome. Um, and so cultural competence at different levels. At the micro level, it's respecting a client who may want to go by a particular pronoun, excuse me, and using those pronouns when referring to the client and correcting other professionals. So again, what cultural competence could look like at the micro level is respecting a client's preferred pronouns and using those pronouns when referring to the client and correcting other professionals as well. On the meso level, that could be advocating for an interpreter services at your organization so that more clients can be serviced effectively in the language they feel most comfortable speaking. At the macro level, advocating for required nationwide observance of various religious holidays, cultural holidays. And last but not least, a very good document in which all social workers need to be familiar with is the standards and indicators for cultural competence in social work practice. This document goes through the ethics involved. It provides values and ethics involved with social workers when it comes to cultural competence. It also talks about um, the standards of practice specifically that social workers should be engaged in um, as culturally competent workers and how that looks. This document also goes over key definitions of cultural competence. That's very important for all social workers to go through. Um, I strongly recommend that all social workers review and take a look at the cultural competence standards. These standards will find themselves in the social work licensure, so you need to know it, and also for quizzes and exams for this course. Standards and indicators for cultural competence. A lot of information will be about cultural competence will be ascertained from this document. Um, you can click on this particular link and take your time and review what cultural competence and practice looks like. Also, strongly encourage students to incorporate this document and understanding of cultural competence from this document in their assignments and work. Thank you very much. This is the end of this brief presentation. As a reminder, this is just a brief overview of cultural competence. All students are expected to do the readings in full from the required textbook to get a more detailed knowledge and firm understanding of cultural competence.